What's up, Summoners? King Blair here. Today we're going to be talking about the first team in the set of 4 videos talking about different teams and playstyles in RTA. And for today, it is going to be the Bruiser and Tank playstyle of RTA. So if you liked the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Let's keep subscribing to keep the channel growing. Also, if you would like to support the channel financially and the funded Kings Cup that will be coming out late in October, make sure to become a member of the channel. For $2 a month, you get to have a green name for when you watch the streams and get to use some of the icons, as well as just helping the channel overall grow if you like the content. But enough about the channel. Let's actually talk about what you came here for and kind of a video breakdown how this series will work. So first, why I made the series, I'll say it in all the videos. I feel like right now a lot of players are very intimidated by RTA and don't really have a playstyle or know what to expect when their opponent is drafting, and just overall struggle with drafting as a whole and with building units for RTA. So hopefully after this series you find the playstyle that best fits you and the heroes that could help support that playstyle, as well as have a better understanding of when your opponent goes for certain drafts, what you can expect. So hopefully after all these videos you kind of understand all that good stuff. It's not supposed to be an end-all be-all, but hopefully give you guys a good introduction. So the way that the video will roll out is we'll be looking at a presentation, so going overview, strengths and weaknesses of the playstyle, and then some options that those teams have and some units that you need to watch out for. And then lastly, I'll be showing you guys some sample builds for some of those key units that you can be using. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. Alright, now let's talk about the Tank Bruiser background. So we'll talk a little bit of background, a little bit of strength and weaknesses, and then look at actual units and sample drafts that you can be using. And then at the end, we'll also show some sample builds for some of these key Bruisers. But yeah, let's just get right into it. So biggest thing, what is a Tank Bruiser background? What does it do? When is it used? So Tank Bruiser is going to be one of the most popular and safest strategies in RTA. It is used by top level players all the time. If you've watched tournaments, most likely the people in those tournaments are using this playstyle. The way this playstyle works is primarily by out sustaining against your opponent, out tanking them, walling them out, but then you yourself are able to deal damage to your opponent. So over time, as frenzy stacks up, your team will still be relatively healthy while your opponent will have taken too much damage, and eventually they will just lose the fight to your consistent damage. So now let's see, now that you know an idea of how it plays, let's see some of the strengths and weaknesses of this playstyle. So this playstyle is extremely consistent. Knights, tanks, and bruisers are all very consistent units. They will always do what you expect them to do, and they do not rely on RNG. For example, if you're talking control, which we will see in a different video this week, control does rely on RNG to get certain stuns up, to get certain debuffs on the enemy, and also for cleave you require certain stats and certain key compositions and combo readiness tuning to be able to win. On the other hand, Bruiser and tank teams don't need that. They are consistent. Your tank will always do what it needs to do. Your Aureus will always soak up damage and it will always add extra 10%. Your Adamant Shield will always be cutting damage. All these tank artifacts, all these Bruiser artifacts are very consistent. You know what you're getting yourself into. The other thing though, the tank teams are extremely versatile. There are so many options that you can use to round out your team, half defensive stat while also supporting, that allows you to counterpick your opponent and just win a lot of games if you know what you are doing. So extremely versatile. You can draft your first 2 typical tanks and then have 3 units that you can completely change the strategy around and catch your opponent off guard. So again, very, very versatile playstyle. The walling out, you may wonder, why is that a strength? Why is walling out my opponent? So because frenzy is a thing, if you can stop your opponent from killing one of your units and you can just slowly poke them down, you will be winning the fight. If the opponent can't kill you, you will be killing them, especially if they don't have the sustain to deal with you. So if the opponent does not bring sustain, and a lot of playstyles do not bring sustain, you will just be able to wall them out. The other thing is that this is a very skill heavy playstyle. If you know the meta well, if you know your opponent's picks well, you can make your team and like optimize your team against your enemy You can do a lot of different things, and it allows for a lot of creativity. You are able to make some pretty unique teams with this style of gameplay. The other thing, again, it is very safe. Why do I say it's safe? You're not relying on RNG like I said before, but the reason why it's safe is because your tanks are not going to be dying anytime soon. It's just low grinding. It'll take some time, but you're going to be getting wins. So it's relatively safe. It's a consistent way to win games. As far as the weaknesses of this playstyle, it does lose to control teams. Control teams are often able to put debuffs and lap your team several times and lap your key units. The other thing is that you are going to be giving up your turn 1, which is the reason why this style of team does lose to control, because since you're giving up turn 1, the turn 1 player has an opportunity to lock down your team and set up their team for success. So it's something you have to accept and have to find ways that you can mitigate that. The other thing is that games are long with this playstyle. If you're trying to do this, games are going to be taking a long time. You will be reaching Frenzy 10 in some scenarios, and that means 10 to 15 minutes for just one fight. So again, it's consistent, but fights will be taking a long time. The other thing is that it requires you to have a wide unit pool. If you don't have the counter picks for certain scenarios and you're trying to play this, and you're just drafting the same 5 units, well, it may work at lower ranks. The higher up you go, and as people get more experience with the game, they will be able to counter your units effectively. And if you don't have the proper counters or the proper units built, you will just be losing. And if you don't have the right gear quality, then you also will just be using, since you're not able to tank out properly. The other thing is that this playstyle requires very deep game knowledge. If you are counter picking wrong, you will lose. If you don't catch on to what your opponent's trying to do to break your wall, you will lose. You have to have knowledge of this game. You have to know how your units work with each other. You have to know what units would fit best for your playstyle. So again, very deep game knowledge is required to play this type of team properly, but you also will be getting a lot of wins just through walling people out. As far as matchups, as we mentioned, you do beat cleave because you're able to just survive the cleave, and then because you can just out sustain the cleaver, you usually typically do win. You do lose to control because control can actually just lock you out, and you tie with balanced style comps. That just basically comes down to counter pick. We will see all those other types of gameplay later on throughout this week, but now let's move over to the next part: potential draft picks. So here, this is not all the units in the game that you can use for this style. It is just some key units. The standard draft, though, as you see in the bottom, does include 2 knights. Why does it include 2 knights? Typically, you will want an adamant shield and an aureus, since these are the 2 best artifacts right now. Some teams that can use more than 2 knights, you can probably have one of your knights on Hillock lands. Like, for example, if you're using FCC and Emil Craw, your Ross can be on a Hillock lands, or if you're using F Clury, your F Clury can be on a Justice for All. So, you know, there is versatility, but typically 2 knights is standard because you do want to have that adamant shield and that aureus for survivability. You will also want at least 1 support. If you don't have 1 support, you can still get out sustained and walled out by a proper Bruiser team. So you will want to draft at least 2 knights, at least 1 support to provide healing, to provide barriers, to provide cleansing. And then lastly, you typically will have 1 Bruiser, as the style suggests. You still need to be able to do damage, and Bruisers typically are able to do that. Lastly, the 5th option is typically going to be a damage dealer, but it is optional. So the Bruiser pick and the 5th pick can be either 2 damage dealers, or it can be 2 Bruisers, or it can be an extra knight, or it can be attacker and then triple knight, or it can be double support. You can very much mix it, but at least 2 knights and at least 1 support. As far as some team cores, so Alencia is an amazing unit for bruisering teams out, which is why she's part of a team comp. She's able to beat other bruiser teams, and she's able to strip and take off their setup, while also doing one of the highest single target damage out of any bruiser, and also provide support from the defense up. So one of the best units you can draft for a tank team. The other team core is going to be Craw. Craw, again, the increased defense buff, and also it is a guaranteed 1-for-1 if you have a well-built Craw, which is why he typically is in a team core. F Clury, in case you're doing the Ryla picks. FCC, it's FCC. The barriers are too much. The skill nullifier, she just provides so much for a single knight. And then of course Deannie for buff oriented teams. Deannie is the best defensive unit to put up buffs. There are some other power options with Royale, making it extremely hard to take your team down. A Tywin to counter those control teams that we mentioned. Roz as a way to be able to do damage with your 1 or 2 bruisers that you are bringing with you. Lilias for both anti-control team and as well as doing damage. And CC for anti-control and support. The damage dealers are far and wide. I will not be going over each of them individually, but these are the ones that you typically pick as a 5th option depending on the scenario. This typically will be your 4th to 5th pick. The power options are typically 2nd or 3rd pick. The team cores are typically your 1st picks. The damage dealers are 4th to 5th pick typically. Your counter picks are typically 4th to 5th pick. For counter picks, again, control is your worst enemy. So all these units in the front are to counter control teams. Vivian as well also provides AoE. Crimson Armament in case you don't have enough defensive units such as Craw and Fallen Cecilia. Charlotte to counter those pesky Spectre Tenebria teams, and just any team that's kind of squishy and you can benefit from having AoE. Rowana in case they try to SSB you. Emil for AoE teams. Dark Corvus for countering other Bruiser teams. Emil Hayes for RB. A Sid, while it may not seem as first, he's really good for countering cleave teams if you do want to use that. And of course, Emil Craw for AoE teams, and also for some teams that allow you to do protected Craw team compositions. As far as other options, there's millions of other options, but typically just other Bruisers that can work really, really well. That can fill in that Bruiser pick, or that can fill in that tank pick. So of course Ken, DJ Bazaar because of the immunity and the consistent healing, Elena for AoE counter, Maid Chloe for annoying support, Tenebria for controlling the enemy while also tanking them out. It's actually a pretty nasty thing to do. Violet for anti-water teams, Little Queen Charlotte for anti-dark teams, Apocalypse Robbie for Ross-oriented teams, Charles for other water-heavy buff teams, Chuk since he's just a solid counter pick against fire, Robbie against earth-heavy Bruiser teams, and Holiday Euphine against control teams. The units you do want to watch out for whenever you are playing tank though is going to be Bazaar, Broman, Iseria, and Emil Rin. If you see your opponent draft any of these 4 units, you better be prepared to counter hard, because if you see one of those units, you are most likely going to be losing. So you need to start thinking on how you're going to be counter picking. So hopefully this gives you guys a good idea on how to do it. Your team core, you'll typically want to pick on your 1st or 2nd picks. Your damage dealers, depending on the situation, could be your 3rd pick, could be your 4th pick, could be your 5th pick. And the power options, again, 2nd or 3rd pick. And the counter picks and other options, 4th to 5th pick traditionally, but can also go in different positions. But that is all I have for the background on Bruiser tank teams. So now to see some sample builds, so you can start thinking what kind of stats you want to start having in units. I'll show you some units from the Discord as well as from my own arsenal for units you can use. So my A Tywin, as I mentioned, very strong for anti-control. I do have the Adamant Shield on him because he's one of my main tanks for RTA. So if you have him, you see the Adamant Shield, you see the high HP, you see the high defense, and you see the damage that you can still do damage, so you're able to actually take down your enemy. My Well, not the best Rel out there, but gets the job done. Extremely tanky, high effect resistance, so she's not easily tanked. I do want to hit 150 or higher. You see the high defense to complement if I did have a Crawl, and you see her Water's Origin to make her even harder to take down. As far as some of the units that people put on the Discord, Cisa Bellona, one of the very popular damage dealers, you see her being on the tankier side. Pretty high defense, pretty high health, and very high attack on Rangar Strength, so just a sample build that you can use. We also have a sample Fallen Cecilia, very annoying to deal with, very high HP, which means massive shield. We see the Adamant Shield, that's not maxed out, but you get the idea. He's trying to put his tank very early on. We also see for CC, extremely fast CC, able to take the turn before a control team, able to set up immunity and just counter control teams on the spot. Or if they get the first turn, like with a Broman, you're also able to come back after that if they don't land the silence on her, and able to set up that immunity. We also see some Apocalypse Robbies. As we see, they're usually on speed, because again, you don't want a sitting duck. You don't want to slow Robbie for Bruiser teams. You actually want her to be a little bit faster, because you actually want her to be taking turns. You actually want her to be doing damage. You want her to be in there getting some damage in. Tempest Seren, which is a very popular unit. Again, look at the damage, look at the speed. We'll be taking turns. We'll be sustained against the opponent. Some Crawls, as we mentioned. with some effect resistance, high defense, high HP, high speed, so you can set up and try to lap the opponent quicker. We see that Ori is there, as we mentioned. Ori is an Adamant Shield. Typically, we'll be picking 2. We see some of the Alencias. Again, y'all see the damage. That Alencia is going to be killing squishies like they're nothing. So again, a lot of potential for Bruiser teams. And there's many, many more. The Falconeer Clury, pretty fast to cut in with Justice for All. So he typically uses a side knight on that full tank team. Just overall, a lot of different units that people are building to counteract. And then a Charles, of course, if you want a fast Charles, there are several different builds that you can do and several different units that will work well. And then, of course, to end the build, one of my favorite units is Robbie. And you can see my Ross as well. My Ross on Hela Glance, because I use a Tywin and Lilius as my main tanks. If I decide to use Ross as my third knight and not put a support or put a weaker support, Ross can fit that role perfectly. Not the best Ross, but you know, he gets the job done. And the same with my Lilius, can help out a little bit. And then my Robbie would be my Bruiser in those type of teams that can dual attack with my Ross, with my Lilius, and just take the enemy down. So again, there's a lot of different units, but typically what you're looking for is a lot of health, a lot of defense, and ways to get damage mitigation while also dealing damage. So hopefully that gave you guys a good idea on what to look for on some of your sample units. That is all I have for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed and I hope it was informational. We will be doing other teams such as Cleave, Control, and Balance that I mentioned before, and those type of playstyles. So hopefully you liked this video and you found it informational. But that is all I have for you guys today, and I will see y'all next time. Peace.